What's up everyone and welcome back to Your Money Game, the show where we'll get better with saving, spending, and today really it's all about Robo Advisors and whether or not you should be using one. So last week, after turning 6 months old as a customer with Stashaway, I decided to do a review of them and my experience. This week, I thought it's important for us to take a step back to ask ourselves whether or not we should even be with a Robo Advisor. Does it suit us and what are the considerations? What I'll do is I'll briefly touch on the pros because I've talked about that before, but then I'll spend a little bit more time on the cons as well as the considerations. So let's get to it by starting with the pros. The first big one that's always talked about is that it's really easy and cheap to start. Look, figuring out a portfolio for yourself, getting it going, it's all doable, but it does take time and it can be really daunting if you're not experienced in investing. Using a Robo Advisor, it's really a matter of minutes and then you get going and you already have a portfolio built for you and you're ready to roll. So even if you've got a really small amount to start, Robo Advisors allow you to do that. The next one is that it's automated and it's always managed for you. It automates the construction of the portfolio, what goes inside, it automates the deposit process, it automates the rebalancing process, and they automatically send you updates. Awesome! Finally, they talk about it being low cost. And yes, when you compare it to regular unit trusts or more commonly found ones, they tend to be much cheaper. The other element of cost that's often overlooked is also tax efficiency. And usually with robo-advisors, they're smart in how they construct their portfolios, so you kind of save on those areas where you're not usually very alert to, like taxes. Next, let's get into the two outright cons in my opinion. The first con is that the cost might not be as cheap as you think. Very quickly, the way your total costs are, it's actually two different tiers. The first tier is when they talk to you about the different expense ratio that the robo-advisor itself has. So on an annual basis, some robo-advisors will advertise generally between 0.8–0.88% all the way down to about 0.2, depending on how much money you have with them. So that's the first layer of cost. The second layer of cost applies to all robo-advisors. How they work is that they buy underlying different funds, and each of those underlying funds on that tier have their own different costs. Now, I can't speak for all robo-advisors, but generally you will not see these costs expressed in your statements. So what happens is you're relying on the promise of the robo-advisor to keep costs generally low. There's no reason to not believe them, but you won't have absolute clarity on what the final cost is. The second bit about cost is that you really can learn how to DIY your own portfolio. It does take time to learn how to do it, but it can be done and really isn't as complicated as a lot of people think. And I'll provide a couple of links down below for you to kind of dig a bit deeper on how you can start. By doing it yourself, you can save a fair amount in expense ratios over the long term. The second con is that robo-advisors are generally not very flexible. And it's done that way for a reason. Because robo-advisors were built to keep things really simple for you. They don't want you mucking around with different things. So if you're the type who likes to fine-tune different options, for example, you want to fine-tune the portfolio selection, you want to fine-tune the way the rebalancing is done, you can't do any of those things. So those are the only two outright cons, at least in my opinion. So let's dig deeper into different considerations that some people might read as outright cons, but I really think it's a bit more nuanced than that. The first consideration is hitting that subscribe button because that really helps my channel grow. In all seriousness though, the first consideration is that have you thought about what is your basis of comparison? If you don't have a benchmark or a way to compare how the robo-advisor is going to be working for you, it's going to be very hard to determine whether or not it's the right fit over the long term. Are the returns up to your expectations? Relative to what? When is the right time for you to make a comparison? What is a right apple-to-apple comparison? So if you don't have some idea of how you're going to make a decision over the long term whether to keep your robo or not, it is going to be challenging. This is a very personal question because some people benchmark it in different ways. They benchmark it based on their own performance, they benchmark it based off other robos. Some people think about it as benchmarking versus the index. Honestly speaking, it's perfectly fine to get started. You don't need to think about this right away. But if you're considering using a robo-advisor, keep that at the back of your mind because as you go along, you'll want to ask yourself how do you make that comparison over time and how do you judge whether or not to keep being a customer. Next, do you need help building and maintaining a portfolio or do you truly need financial advice? So despite the name of the entire category, robo-advisors, they don't really actually provide advice in a holistic sense. In general, what they really mean by advice is that they're going to ask you a series of questions to determine your risk profile. And what that really means is how comfortable are you with volatility, which is the swings of the markets. So all markets will rise and fall and will continue to chop over our lifetimes. The question is really, are you going to be comfortable with that amount of choppiness? So if you happen to live a more complicated financial life, say you have different obligations, you've got a family to feed, you've got parents to take care of, you've got perhaps different obligations that you might need to really think about in the near future or even long term, robo-advisors are not designed to take that into account. So that's why there's still a lot of value in having a human financial advisor look into your holistic life. Next is how much time and effort do you really want to pay towards investments? Like I said earlier, learning to build your portfolio does take some time and it can be scary if you've never done it before, but it's really doable. However, for some people, it really isn't your cup of tea, and that's perfectly fine. Not all of us are interested in this stuff, so it's cool to just rely on a different kind of service like a robo-advisor to do it all for you. But honestly, if you ask me how much time does it really take to build a passive investing portfolio for yourself, I'd say that it's actually over a weekend. When it comes to managing your portfolio, it's truly just a matter of minutes. If you have a set path already, it really takes a little bit of time, maybe every 6 months, every 1 year, to rebalance, which is just buying and selling some of the different assets to make sure it's going back to the ratio that you're comfortable with. So I did a couple of videos on this subject before, so if you really wanted to, you can get going. The next consideration is for those of you who are interested in building your own portfolio. You gotta ask yourself, how much control do you have over your emotions as well as your impulses? Like I said, I'm an advocate for DIY, but at the same time, a lot of people forget that when it comes to investing, it's really all about consistency over a long term. When the markets dip, do you feel an overpowering urge to sell stuff? When the markets are going well, are you kind of jittery and panicky and you don't really want to invest? Robo-advisors as a whole don't really protect you from that either. You can still manually shut off your investments, you can kind of turn off the automation. And truth is, even human advisors can't stop you from blowing things up yourself. But again, if you know that you don't have a lot of control of your impulses at this point in time, maybe a robo-advisor is a good place to start. The last key consideration is related to one key point. Not all robo-advisors are built the same. Despite being the same term of what they are, the way the services are crafted, the underlying products, they all have very different features. Because of that, you as a customer can choose to use these robo-advisors differently to your advantage. The first is use it as a benchmark. If you can create your own portfolio and get it running, you have portfolio A, you can invest in the robo-advisor with portfolio B, and you can just let them both run in the near term, maybe a couple of years, 3 years, who knows. But over that period of time, you can at least benchmark your different performance with what a robo service has provided, and you can see that over time, maybe it's a good option to stick with the robo or DIY. You can also use them to access very specific markets. To give you an example, I'm a customer of Scythe, specifically for the SG REITs product. And the reason why is I'm just really too lazy to pick up individual stocks of Singapore REITs and build my own portfolio. The 0.4% fee, I think it's worth it, so I'm going to pay them for it. A really fascinating option in Malaysia is Wahid Invest. So to my Muslim friends, it's the only option out there that I've seen who are offering some kind of Sharia compliant investing. Finally, use it as training wheels or even a learning tool. So if you're new to investing and you really want to DIY eventually, there's nothing wrong with starting here, learning how they build your portfolio, even mimicking it and following it over time. Because you're a customer, you also get access to all the different kind of email support, and usually they're teaching you and educating you along the way. Because they're transparent, when they build a portfolio for you, when you pull up the statement, you will see all the underlying assets. And from there, you can do your own research to figure out 1, what is the different kind of funds that they've been buying? 2, understand why they've allocated the ratio of your investments that way. And 3, what are the underlying costs of those individual funds? So as you do all that research, you learn for yourself what makes sense to them, and eventually you'll form your own ideas of what makes sense to you. So I really hope this video helped you think about the different considerations as you decide whether or not to use a robo-advisor. And if you have any other considerations or questions, just comment below and I'll get to it. So if you found this useful, I would really appreciate you hitting that like, subscribe as well as that bell button, because I'll be back again next Sunday with a brand new video. And until then, take care and keep playing your own game.